Shashi Tharoor.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I rise to second the motion moved by my friend and honourable colleague Dr. Girija Vyas that an address be presented to the President in the following terms: that the members of the Lok Sabha assembled in this session are deeply grateful to the President for the address which he has been pleased to deliver to both Houses of Parliament assembled together on March 12, 2012. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this month, in fact, by the end of this month, India will be determined to be, by the International Monetary Fund, the third largest economy in the world in purchasing power parity terms. This is because, though our economy in absolute terms is only $1.3 trillion by comparison with Japan's figure of 4.3, and that means that Japan is much larger than us, in purchasing power parity terms, our economy, in terms of the strength of what we are able to buy with our money, has grown to the equivalent of $4.06 trillion. And whereas Japan will not grow in this fiscal year, thanks sadly to the tsunami, the earthquake, the after effects of the nuclear disaster, and so on, our economy, even in the most pessimistic projection, will grow at 6.9%, which means that India will formally overtake Japan when the numbers are in on the 31st of March this year. Now, this is a major accomplishment for our government and for our country, but it is not grounds for complacency. Rather, it points to the serious and responsible stewardship of the country's economy in the hands of the UPA government. As you know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are about to launch into the 12th five-year plan. We are already projecting an estimated growth rate of 9% in that five-year plan, starting on the 1st of April. It so happens that in the course of the current five-year plan, we will in fact be averaging something like 8.2% when the numbers are finally in. So we are looking at a track record that we can be proud of as a government and as a nation, and we intend to be able to continue in that direction. But whether we're growing at 9% or whether we're growing at 6% or any other percent, our real focus, Mr. Deputy Speaker, must be on the bottom 25% of our society. And that is where the strength of the UPA government lies. We are interested in inclusive growth. You've heard this already being mentioned by my honourable colleague. The difference between the UPA government and some of its distinguished predecessors is that while it believes in growth, it believes in an India that must shine. It's an India that must shine for everyone, an India in which growth is accompanied by redistributive justice. One example which the President herself highlighted in her address was the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. As she mentioned, this has created 1,100 crore man-days of employment. The expression man-days is a bit old-fashioned. I can tell you from my visits to many of these projects in my home district that many of the workers are women, and they are women whose lives have been transformed by the existence of this scheme introduced by the UPA government. I have spoken, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to many of these women workers, and I can tell you moving stories of, for example, one woman who said that without this opportunity to work 100 days, even at a minimum wage, she would have had to give up her handicapped child for adoption to an orphanage. And she said, what has enabled me to look after this child in my own home is the fact that this government has given me the means to be able to earn a decent livelihood to support my child. These are the kinds of stories one hears day after day if one talks to the men and women who are benefiting from the National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. And what is more, as you know, this has transformed the countryside. We are now seeing bank accounts being opened because the government rightly insists that the wages for the scheme should be paid directly into the bank accounts of the workers and not through a middleman or a contractor. The result is that 90 lakh new bank accounts have been opened in this country in the last 2 years for people who previously did not know the advantages of banking in our rural areas. These are the kinds of transformations that are taking place, because the basic idea is not just to hand out money. The idea is to empower our people by giving them in their own hands the right to work, the right to gain from their work, the right to support and look after their own families, the UPA government has been able to bring about a transformation in the lives of ordinary people in our country. Day after day, these are the stories we are hearing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and this is what inclusive growth is all about. The empowerment of the poor, giving them the purchasing power that has transformed in many ways our rural economy and taking the country forward in a way that no longer leaves behind so many of our underprivileged rural residents. The same logic lies behind the telecoms revolution that the President mentioned. That is also a logic of empowerment. Yes, the numbers speak for themselves. We are already the world's second largest telecommunications market. We have overtaken the United States. Today, as the President mentioned, 76 connections, telephone connections exist per 100 people. Just 30 years ago, before Shri Rajiv Gandhi first initiated the communications revolution in our country, we had one telephone connection for every 300 Indians. And from there we have gone today to 76 for every 100 Indians. These are the kinds of changes we have brought about, but second largest is not even going to be enough. This year it is estimated we will overtake China to become the largest telephone communications market in the world. But as I said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's about empowerment. It is not about numbers alone. Who is carrying these mobile telephones? Let me tell you from my own constituency, I know fishermen are taking mobile phones out to sea. And what are they doing? The government gives them, through the GPS system, a way of finding out where the best shoals of fish lie so they can catch them. And then when they come back, they start dialing on their mobile phones all the market towns along the coast to find out where they can get the best price for the fish they have caught. Why only speak of Kerala? Farmers anywhere in India, just 10 years ago, you would find a farmer at harvest time would have to harvest his crop, then go or send an able-bodied male relative, maybe a 10-year-old boy, walking 10, 12 kilometers to the nearest market town to find out if the market was open, whether he could sell the crop he had just harvested, what price he could sell it for, what the competition was. Then that little boy would walk back again 10, 12 kilometers in the hot sun, would come back to the farmer. They would then load their carts and head off to market. Half a day's back-breaking labor that is today saved by 1 2-minute phone call. That is what the revolution that is being brought about in this country by the UPA government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We are talking about the empowerment of the underclass. This is the real meaning, the real content of concepts of socialism that have been bandied about so many years in this House. We have begun to bring about real change that changes the lives of ordinary people in our country. This is why the President mentioned that the government is now going to create a national optical fiber network, spending 20,000 crore rupees. It's again about empowerment. It is about bringing broadband connectivity to our villages, to our panchayats, because today it is not enough for us to make lectures about the poverty line. We also have to understand the fiber optic line. The truth is that today's information revolution, which our government has seized upon, is very unlike the French Revolution, because it has a lot of liberty, some fraternity, and no equality. We want to bring equality to our rural areas. We want to connect the unconnected, and that is an activity of this government that I know the President highlighted because she wants this House to support it strongly. This is all part of building up the unseen infrastructure of India, the rural infrastructure of our country. If you can connect every panchayat by road, which we have not yet been able to do, but we are doing to the best of our ability through a number of very important schemes, including one from the Prime Minister's Gram Sadak Yojana. If in addition to connecting every panchayat by road, by good all-weather motorable roads, we can also bring in connectivity by broadband, we will be able to find our villages prospering, because jobs that today can only be done in the cities because they have the internet connections will now be able to be done in the villages. You can actually sit and run a call center in a village if you have enough fiber optic cable and enough broadband connectivity. Similarly with health, you may have noticed that the President mentioned that we will try and increase our health expenditure to 2.5% of our GDP. That would be a very significant development because it will finally ensure an objective of the UPA government through both its terms that nobody should have to walk more than 10 kilometers from their place of residence to get to a health center that is fully staffed, that has all the medicines, that has doctors and nurses to look after people. We are getting there. We have made progress, and with the increase in outlay, we will make further progress. Similarly, the President highlighted 15% of the outlays of certain identified government schemes would be spent on specifically disadvantaged sections of our minority communities. Mahatma Gandhi ji had always exhorted us to look at the most vulnerable sections of our society to see whether our programs were having an impact on their lives. Today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with this, we are going to be in a position to ensure that the most disadvantaged of the disadvantaged, the poorest, the most vulnerable amongst the minorities, are themselves targeted beneficiaries of government action. This attempt to reach out to the most vulnerable is the key to inclusive growth, because empowerment does not come from empowering only those who are already in a position to seize power. It comes from empowering those at the bottom of our socio-economic ladder. And there, the National Food Security Bill, which we are looking forward to receiving in this House, and which the President also mentioned, is going to bring forward an important assurance to every Indian that he or she will never need to go hungry. And with that, and with the computerization of the public distribution system, so we can ensure that those who need subsidized grain and food will get it. With all of this, you will see true empowerment, because a hungry person is going to find it very difficult to be an empowered person. A hungry person cannot take advantage of what our country has to offer as it marches on in development, and this hungry person will benefit today from the efforts and the programs of our UPA government. The needs of our national infrastructure, of course, go beyond the rural area, and there is no question that our coming five-year plan, the 12th five-year plan, anticipates that we will need to spend about $1 trillion, that is 50 lakh crore of rupees, in building up our infrastructure. This is an extraordinarily large target. The government is very conscious that it cannot raise all this money by itself, and so the opening to public-private partnerships is part of this approach. Because if you have the credibility by doing the kinds of things I've described to you today, then outside investors will also come and will also join you as you build your nation, our nation. 80% perhaps of the infrastructure of the India of 2030 is yet to be built. And we must think 20 years ahead. If we want to envisage the kind of India that our children should live in 2030, we have to start building it today. There is a famous story about the Emperor Jahangir and a gardener, where he asked the gardener to plant a particular plant which was going to give a very beautiful flowering blossom. And the gardener said, "But Jahanpana, this plant will only blossom in 100 years. And Emperor Jahangir said, "All the more reason why you should plant it today. Let us not wait till tomorrow." That is our approach in this government, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We want to see the India of 2030 not just on paper, not just as a dream, but beginning on the ground today. The fact is that these opportunities to help build the infrastructure of India are opportunities we want the private sector to seize, both in India and abroad. And for that, I would urge this House to send a strong signal to the world that India is ready for investment, that under the stewardship of the UPA government, we have done the basics, we have done what is necessary, and we are in a position to open up in order to attract investment and grow our country, build the structures on which our children's future will in turn be built. This is why, for example, in energy, another area flagged by the President, we actually need to increase by a multiple of 7 times in the next 25 years, or from 2009, when we came back to power. 25 years, we expect to see a 7 times multiple increase in power generation. The resources for that, again, cannot only come from the government. It has to be a partnership with the private sector, with investors from inside and outside. But we, in turn, are able to hold our own with the world. As the President pointed out, our exports grew at 34% last year, 2011. And that means that we are able to make goods that the rest of the world wants and needs. And we are, therefore, dealing with the rest of the world on our own terms, just as we seek their involvement in our growth and development on our terms. The fact is that the President announced yesterday a new national manufacturing policy, and manufacturing is important. We need to employ our young people. Let's face it, for some time now we have been speaking of a possible demographic dividend, a great demographic advantage for our country. That is that 65% of our population is under 35, which means that for the next 30 years, we should have a youthful, dynamic, productive workforce when the rest of the world, including China, is aging. But that workforce will only materialize, and that success will only be possible if we are able to educate these young people before they enter the workforce. Not everyone is going to come out of a college. We need to find vocational training skills for those who are not going to get a conventional college education, but we should do that. It seems to me a disgrace that as a result of past policies which we are changing in this government, that we have a situation where in a country of 1.2 billion people, we have a nationwide shortage of masons. That you only become a plumber or a carpenter if your father was a plumber or a carpenter and he's taught you the skills. We do not have the skills imparted through official, effective vocational training establishments, and the UPA government is committed to setting those up so that we can make sure that our young people are equipped to take advantage of the opportunities of the new economy that we in India are building in the early 21st century. The truth is that the alternative is too awful to contemplate if we do not get this right. If this House does not support the government in introducing the educational reforms it has presented to the House, the vocational training plans it is presenting to the House, the alternative is going to be that instead of a demographic dividend, we will have a demographic disaster. Because these young people, if they do not have the training and the education to take work, they will do what Maoists have done in 165 districts of our country's 602 districts. They will pick up the gun because they will feel they have no stake in the future of our society and they have nothing to lose if they are simply going to rebel in this fashion. And therefore, since we know, and I can tell you from having lived around the world, there is nothing more dangerous to any country in the world than large numbers of unemployed young men, that the policies of this government are absolutely aiming to ensure that our young men will find employment, they will be educated and trained to be skilled to find their employment, and that we will grow our economy in a way that makes it possible for them to find meaningful work. That's why the national manufacturing policy was mentioned, and that is why we are trying to move forward across the board in so many areas of effective action, so that our young people will have the stake in our economy that is going to give them and India the future we all deserve. We are also, of course, going beyond manufacturing and the kind of vocational training I mentioned to something also more aspirational, the development of India as a knowledge economy. The President mentioned, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we would increase the amount of money that our government is devoting to research and development from 1% to 2% of our GDP. That's no small matter. There are very few countries in the world that are spending 2% of their GDP. But I remember when our Honorable Prime Minister made that announcement at the Indian Science Congress, it was an extraordinarily important decision because it shows that we are going to take advantage of what is perhaps India's biggest asset, and that is our brains. We are a land perhaps of greater brain than brawn, but our brains can be applied effectively to the creation of a 21st century knowledge economy. Already multinational giants like GE or Philips employ more researchers in India than they do in their parent country headquarters. This is also a reflection of the environment that has been created by the UPA government. The high quality intellectual output that we are able to give to the kind of work we do in research actually augurs extremely well for our country. Innovation is becoming the major theme now coming out of India, and it's innovation at a sensible cost. In fact, if you were to Google the expression frugal innovation, you will find that the first 20 answers all relate to India, because we have found a way of innovating inexpensively, of cutting out the frills because our country can't afford them. And that is why we have become the country that has invented the world's cheapest electrocardiogram machine, for example, at 1/20th the cost of foreign countries. The country which has, after all, produced the world's cheapest automobile in the Tata Nano. The country which has very recently, our Human Resources Development Minister introduced a tablet, the Akash tablet, which in many ways is like the iPad which, as you all know, costs 40 or 50,000 rupees in the market. But in some ways is better than the iPad because it has 2 USB ports. It needs only a 2-volt battery, a iron lithium battery, which can be charged using solar power, because we want this tablet to be used in places where electricity supply may not be regular. And this innovation has come out of India at what price? At less than $50. In fact, the government is going to subsidize it for students, and an Indian student in a village will be able to get this tablet for $25. So 1,000 rupees and change will give an ordinary poor Indian village student a piece of equipment comparable in every useful respect to the luxurious iPad. This is the kind of change that is happening. I was not surprised, therefore, when I was invited by the University of Toronto to inaugurate an India Innovation Center. The outside world is noticing our innovations. The buzzword now in the international community is Indovation, Indian innovation. And all this has been made possible because of the enabling environment created by the UPA government. And it's something which I believe we should applaud in this House. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there is also India's great strength in providing services. Services to the rest of the world. In fact, during the recession, which my honourable colleague Srimati Girija Vyas mentioned, that we had resisted that, the fact is that while our merchandise exports did go down during the recession, our services exports actually went up. And they went up during the global recession because of the strength we have given to the business of services in India. There are Indian radiologists reading MRIs from the most prestigious American hospitals. We have medical transcription services, so a doctor in the Western world can dictate medical notes at night into a machine. They will arrive when he goes to sleep. They're transcribed in India while we are awake, and they get back to him the next morning. That kind of service that India is able to provide that no one else can. We have young Indian lawyers writing briefs now for international cases. These are all changes that this House is perhaps not sufficiently conscious of, but it's part of the services revolution that India is leading in the world today. Hospitality. The President mentioned tourism as an important area. People must recognize that tourism actually creates more jobs than industry does. And it creates jobs often for relatively unskilled or semi-skilled young people who don't have perhaps the education to do other things, but who can work in hotels, can be waiters, can assist cooks, and can learn on the job. Tourism, therefore, is something that for us is a development priority. It is not just something for the comfort and convenience of foreigners and five-star hotels. If we promote tourism, we help poor Indians. And this is something that this government is committed to doing. The President mentioned a 12% growth target in tourism in the next 5 years. And I assure you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that this is one more indication of the government's consciousness of how to move forward in the demands and needs of the 21st century. Foreign direct investment has been mentioned. We do know that there is a proposal made by the government which for the moment has been suspended. But the truth is that in the global climate today, foreign direct investment overall has been coming down. In our country, we received only $19 billion in the last fiscal year. But let me tell you the other side of that story. The remittances we have been getting from our own NRIs, our own non-resident Indians, has gone up every single year of the global recession. When the world started a recession in 2008, 2009, our NRIs, our diaspora, sent home $46.4 billion. In the next year, they sent home $55.75 billion. In the third year, last year, they sent $57.6 billion. So Indians abroad believe in India. They believe in the work of the UPA government. They have faith that their money will be put to good use in this country. And that is the message I would like this House to send to the world. If our own diaspora believes in our country, if they, very often hard-working blue-collar workers from places like my district, working in countries in the Gulf, if they can send money back to India, certainly this House ought to show greater confidence in the economic management of the UPA government and send a signal to the rest of the world, come and invest in us, we are doing well with your money. But I also want to say a brief tribute to these NRIs. Years ago in a book, I asked the question, in a book that I wrote, should NRI stand for not really Indian or never relinquished India, because there's a little bit of both in our NRIs. They have left our country, but they have not given up on us. They are, in many ways, people who have not relinquished India. Today we can add, having seen these numbers of NRI remittances, they are also the now required Indians, the NRIs of our country. We require them to help us. Well, since I'm no longer an NRI, I can speak of them objectively with a great deal of admiration for their dedication and their patriotism to our country. My honourable colleague also mentioned the strength of our democracy, which I'm proud to say our government has safeguarded with a tremendous amount of conviction. The pluralism of India is something the UPA stands for. We do not accept narrower definitions of Indianness, bigoted definitions of what makes India what it is. We are a land, we believe in the UPA, that is the land of everyone who has ever contributed to our civilization, a land of people who have over millennia helped build India into the India we have today. This role of our UPA government in sustaining through conscious governmental policy the diversity of our country rests on a profound understanding that India is a land that experiences divisions but can overcome these divisions. Divisions of caste, of creed, of color, of culture, of consonant, of conviction, of costume and custom, because we can still rally around a consensus. And that consensus, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is on a very simple principle, that in a rich and diverse democracy like ours, you don't really need to agree all the time, so long as you can agree on the ground rules of how you will disagree. We have seen political disagreements in our country. We have seen them being resolved at the ballot box. And we, in the UPA, have taken victory and defeat in stride because we accept that this is how democracy works. In the same spirit, we should say to our friends on the other side that democracy is also about respectfully listening to arguments and making counter-arguments, not about disrupting the work of this august House. Let us join hands together to make this House an effective instrument of our people. Let us make it together a House where we will actually discuss policies, including in the remarks that will follow in response to the motion that has been moved. Let us, in a constructive way, look at how India can move forward, because at the end of the day, every member of this House surely shares the same objective, an India that is an India we all wish to be proud of. It's sad to see political divisions on the issue of terrorism. Our Honourable Home Minister made the point today that terrorism is an issue that transcends quarrels between the central government and state governments. We do need to overcome these problems, and I don't want to prejudge the outcome of the consultations the Minister said will take place with all the state governments. But I do want to highlight one point that the President herself made, which is that 18 terrorist modules have actually been dismantled by the UPA government in 2011. We always focus on the bad news. If ever there is a bomb that goes off in a Bombay bazaar, in a Mumbai bazaar, we will of course absolutely focus all our intentions, our headlines, our television news on what happens. But we pay no attention at all to the terrorist bombings that did not happen because of our effective work. The dog that didn't bark never makes the news. But the fact is, if the President of India can stand before the two houses and tell you that 18 terrorist modules have been neutralized in 2011, that does go to the credit of the government, and I appeal to this House to give credit where credit is due. I would like briefly, I'm conscious of the time, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I would like briefly to turn to foreign policy as well, since the President touched upon it. The effective stewardship of our nation's external interests in the hands of the UPA government, led by our Honourable Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, has been widely applauded around the world. We have had, of course, to spend a fair amount of time on our immediate neighbourhood. We live, as the expression goes, in a tough neighbourhood. We have had some serious challenges coming from across the borders of our country, and it's extremely important that, as the Prime Minister has done, that we devote the kind of time necessary to ensuring that the tranquility and peace of our neighbourhood is not disturbed and does not spill over into our country. But in addition to that, we have been serving for the last year and a half on the United Nations Security Council as a non-permanent member. We have been able to use that experience to demonstrate to the world how a responsible emerging power has emerged onto the global stage. Today, we can proudly say that India is looked upon with respect in all the chancelleries of the world's capitals, and the respect particularly felt for our Honourable Prime Minister is one that has been widely acknowledged. We have seen, as you know, a Time magazine poll of global leaders has said that the most single respected global leader in the world is India's Prime Minister. And when President Obama of the United States was asked to name the global leaders in the world whom he respected, the first name he mentioned was again our Prime Minister of India. These are all matters that go beyond political parties. These are matters that India, all Indians should be proud of, because our Prime Minister is your Prime Minister on the other side of the House as well as ours. But let us also stress that it is not merely respect we are seeking. We, in this UPA government, are determined to safeguard the national interests of India effectively and of Indian people wherever they may be found. Which is why, as the President mentioned, we had, during the civil war in Libya, during the outbreak of hostilities that jeopardized the lives of 16,000 Indians there, we were able to effectively conduct Operation Safe Homecoming that brought home 16,000 of our fellow citizens safe from disaster. This is the kind of tangible focus on Indian interests that you are seeing day after day, week after week from the UPA government. Now, it is fitting that I conclude, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We have to acknowledge there are still huge problems that we need to overcome. This country has never, this government has never pretended that everything is perfect. We know there are challenges. The Prime Minister quite recently, in releasing a report on child malnutrition, even said there are matters of which we should be ashamed, and child malnutrition is one such matter. In our country, we cannot hide our heads in the sand. There are very serious problems of poverty that we need to overcome in our country. I earned some unfair notoriety a couple of years ago when some gentleman from the other side of the House, or with sympathies there, spoke of India being a superpower, and I said we can't speak of being a superpower when we are still super poor. This was not a popular thing to say, but it's true. We do have a large number of our people in whose service the UPA government is working. People we are determined to pull out of poverty, but we have been doing it. Every year of this government's existence, we have pulled out approximately 1% of our population from below the poverty line. Last year was 0.78%, but if you look at the Planning Commission figures, we are thinking of about 10 million people a year who have been no longer under the poverty line under our government. And this is it's slow. There is a lot more that needs to be done, but we are not China. China has grown at breakneck speed, but if you grow at breakneck speed, you also break a few necks. We don't do that in India. We bring our people along with us in the process of growth and development. And I want to stress that the UPA government is marching, if I can use computer language, on both the hardware of development and the software of development. The hardware, the roads, the airports, the railways, the infrastructural questions have not been neglected, as you know from the President's speech, but also the software of development, the human capital on which our nation rests, the human capital of our ordinary people, the Indian men and women in the poorest homes in this country. The objective of our government is and must remain to ensure that they get 3 square meals a day, that they are able to send their children to a good school, a good government school that teachers actually come to and teach, that they are able themselves to aspire to decent jobs that we train and equip them for, and that we try and create in our economy, so that they and their children can look to a better future. That is the purpose of government. And we must be conscious that we are building this country amongst a very, very youthful population. I mentioned the numbers earlier, 65% under 35, but I can tell you that our Prime Minister, when he addressed the newly elected Congress members of Parliament just 2.5 years ago in the Central Hall, said, never forget that we got a lot of support of young voters in this election. And he said, we must never stop respecting the impatience of the young. That is what the UPA government is conscious of, the impatience of the young. Our young have a right to be impatient. They have a right to want change. They have a right to want to see progress, and it is our job to provide that, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We in the UPA have a sweeping vision for the future of this country, and we are on course to bring about these changes. This is a vision which we have not heard from the other side of the House and I am not sure we will hear in the debates this afternoon, because it is a vision that sees a great adventure in this nation of bringing 1.2 billion people out into the forefront of the world of the 21st century, of doing so by connecting 600 million poor Indians, bringing them into the 21st century, connecting 600 million Indian villagers into the global village. These are major challenges, but these are worthwhile ambitions and worthwhile aspirations for a country like ours. And we in the UPA are doing this in an open society, in a democratic society where our policies will be challenged at the vote, at the ballot box, and also in the streets. We are trying to do this at the helm of a rich, diverse, and plural civilization, but one that, in our view, should be open to the contention of ideas and interests, that should not be afraid of the prowess or the products of the outside world, that should be determined to liberate and fulfill the creative energies of the Indian people. Such an India is the India that the President spoke of in her address yesterday. It is an India that has grown and will grow. It is an India that stands ready to assume its global responsibilities in the 21st century. And I call upon the House to vote for this motion. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.